could you do this to me? After everything?
The day of my mother's funeral arrived beneath a sky draped in heavy gray mist, the kind that seemed to press down on the entire bay. Newport Bay looked washed of color, and the glass walls of the modern church caught the moisture, so it seemed the building itself was weeping. That, I thought, was more honest than anything happening inside. I stood at the entrance in a plain black dress, smoothing down the crepe fabric as I prepared myself to face my family. That was when my younger sister Rachel appeared, diamonds flashing on her wrist as she flipped her hair with practiced arrogance. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You wore that to Mom's funeral?" She sneered, loud enough for others to hear. "I mean, I get it, times are tough for you, but couldn't you have at least tried?" The sting of her words should have hurt, but instead I found myself hiding a smile. She thought the dress was off the rack. What she didn't know was that I had designed it. More than that, I owned the brand behind it, the boutique we were standing in, and the company that had just terminated her lucrative modeling contract an hour before the funeral began. My name is Elise Morgan, and if life has taught me anything, it's that the best revenge isn't loud or angry. It's subtle, like a whisper that grows into a storm. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is served in couture. That morning, as the mist clung to Newport Bay, I'd zipped up my dress in my childhood bedroom, the only room in my father's house he hadn't renovated in his endless obsession with appearing modern. The dress had no embellishments, no designer logos, no screaming luxury. To an untrained eye, it was forgettable, maybe something you'd buy in a department store on sale. But to those who understood true craftsmanship, it was a $30,000 work of art. My family, of course, never understood. By the time I arrived, the church was already half full. My 10-year-old Prius, a deliberate choice, sat parked between my brother Blake's leased Mercedes and Rachel's borrowed Porsche. Through the tall windows, I could see them already in position. Blake shaking hands while checking his phone, Rachel posing near the flowers as if she were on a photo shoot, and my father Gerald Morgan, rigid in an Armani suit that was outdated, though he believed no one would notice. Inside, people treated them like royalty, condolences flowing like offerings to monarchs. I slipped in quietly through the side door, hoping to avoid the circus, but Aunt Martha's eagle eyes found me. Her air kisses were quick, but her judgmental scan from head to toe lingered. "Oh, Elise, darling," she cooed. "How are you holding up? And how's that little boutique of yours?" "It's fine, Aunt Martha," I replied politely. "You know," she leaned closer, lowering her voice as though sharing valuable advice, "my neighbor's daughter just opened a shop on Etsy. Handmade jewelry. Doing wonderfully. Maybe you two should connect, share tips." I smiled because I had perfected that smile over 15 years of family gatherings. The kind that looked grateful but meant nothing. "That's very thoughtful. I'll keep it in mind." The service began, an orchestrated performance of grief. A string quartet filled the air with solemn notes, flowers towered like monuments, and a pastor who had met my mother exactly twice droned on about her dedication to family. My mother would have hated it. She was dedicated to her craft, the small boutique she had run for 30 years. She taught women that elegance was not about expensive labels, but about seeing yourself clearly and wearing clothes that reflected that truth. After the service, the reception hall buzzed with chatter. I poured myself a black coffee into a flimsy paper cup and thought about how absurd this all was. My mother, who had believed beauty was about dignity, had been sent off with a display of luxury he borrowed and rented. Then, from across the room, Rachel's voice rang out. There she is. She stood with her quartet of followers, each one desperate to orbit her fading star. She gestured at me with her manicured nails, gel tips, no longer acrylics, which I noticed meant money was tighter than she let on. Elise, she said with mock sweetness. We were just talking about you. How brave you are, keeping Mom's little shop alive. Though honestly, she leaned closer, lowering her voice into a stage whisper everyone could hear. Wouldn't it be easier just to work retail? Nordstrom has excellent benefits. Her friends giggled, offering pity disguised as kindness. One even added, there's no shame in a steady paycheck. My daughter started at Macy's. Now she's a department manager. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee. I'll keep that in mind. But Rachel wasn't done. Her smile sharpened. I just can't believe you wore that to Mom's funeral, she said, gesturing to my dress. Mom deserved better than something off the rack. The laughter from her friends was the same as always, thin, nervous, obedient. Blake appeared at her side, slipping into his favorite role, the successful brother offering charity. Hey, Ellie, he said, using the nickname I'd begged him to stop using years ago. If you ever need money for a proper dress, just ask. We're family. How generous, I thought, watching the tired stress lines under his concealer. I'll remember that, I said lightly. The truth was, they had no idea who I really was. They thought I was struggling, a failed dreamer clinging to a boutique too small to matter. They assumed my Prius was necessity, not camouflage. They believed I lived in a studio apartment when, in reality, I owned an entire floor at Meridian Towers. And yet, I didn't correct them. Not yet. Because sometimes, letting people underestimate you is the most powerful move you can make. That night, as the mist rolled back into Newport Bay and the city lights began to glow, I knew one thing for certain. By the end of this week, my family's illusions about me, about themselves, about everything would come crashing down. And when it did, they'd remember this funeral not as the day we buried my mother, but as the day they began to see me for the first time. The reception stretched on, a haze of perfume, hushed gossip, and the clink of crystal glasses borrowed from the church hall's limited collection. I stood quietly with my paper cup of coffee, hoping to fade into the background, but in a family like mine, invisibility was impossible. Everywhere I turned, relatives treated me like some cautionary tale. Aunt Martha had already compared my boutique to an Etsy hobby, but she was only the first. Cousin Jennifer cornered me next, her voice syrupy with fake concern. Elise, I've been meaning to ask, she said, tugging at her pearl necklace. I have some clothes I was planning to donate. Barely worn, still very good brands, Banana Republic and Taylor. Would you like them for your shop? Her tone suggested she was doing me a favor. I smiled, that same smile I had worn since I was old enough to understand that pity could cut sharper than cruelty. That's very thoughtful, Jennifer. I'll keep it in mind. The truth was, my boutique didn't need her donations. It didn't even need customers. What looked like a small neighborhood shop was actually a facade, a mask for an empire. But none of them could imagine that. To them, I was the sister who couldn't quite keep up, the daughter who chose passion over practicality. Nearby, I overheard Rachel whispering again. "She's so stubborn," she said to one of her followers. Clinging to that boutique when she could have had a real career. Imagine wasting your life on clothes. It would have been funny if it weren't so familiar. My family had always measured worth in surface symbols, cars, houses, handbags with initials stamped in gold. They thought appearances were proof of value, when in reality, appearances were the cheapest currency of all. Blake soon joined the game, stepping closer with the kind of fake concern that always had a sharp edge. "Ellie," he said, using that nickname again, "if you need a loan to keep your boutique afloat, I could probably arrange one through the bank. The rates would be high, of course, given your situation, but it might buy you a few months." His words dripped with condescension. Given your situation, he thought I was barely surviving. He thought I didn't know his own bank was collapsing under the weight of bad loans and federal scrutiny. He thought he held the power. My father arrived then, taking his place as patriarch. His cufflinks caught the light, but I knew they were replicas. He'd sold the Cartier originals months ago. "Elise is doing fine with her hobby," he announced to the circle, his tone dismissive. "Your mother left her that shop free and clear. Sometimes that's enough for some people." Some people. As if I were another species. As if contentment meant failure. Rachel, always eager to add the final word, sighed dramatically. "Well, she's not doing that badly. The Prius is very eco-conscious, and living in a studio apartment must be easy, less to clean." The assumptions fell over me like rain I'd long stopped trying to dodge. The Prius I drove to family events so no one would question the Bentley parked elsewhere. The studio apartment that was actually my private penthouse overlooking the skyline. The boutique they mocked as small was in fact my laboratory, where my designs began before they walked Paris and Milan. But their blindness no longer hurt me. It only revealed who they were, people desperate to feel superior by keeping someone else beneath them. Aunt Martha wasn't finished. She leaned in again, her voice dripping with suggestion. "My neighbor's daughter is doing so well with Etsy, Elise. You should talk to her, maybe learn a thing or two about online success." I nodded politely. The irony almost made me laugh. While she spoke, my assistant had just confirmed 3 flagship store openings in Tokyo and London and Paris. Meanwhile, my relatives compared me to an Etsy side hustle. It was a scene I'd witnessed 100 times before. Relatives swapping vacation stories I could have bought twice over, suggesting career advice while I employed 8,000 people across continents. They spoke about investments while my portfolio quietly dwarfed theirs 100 times over. But here's the thing. Pity from the privileged is sharper than mockery. It isn't just cruelty, it's a judgment disguised as kindness. They thought they were offering me wisdom. They thought they were extending charity. What they didn't know was that their wisdom was outdated, their charity unnecessary, their judgment meaningless. As I stood there, my paper cup growing cold in my hand, I realized something profound. Their blindness wasn't about me at all. It was about them. They needed me to be small so they could feel large. They needed to believe I was failing so they could pretend they were succeeding. Society does this all the time. We measure people by cars, by clothes, by the square footage of their homes, never realizing that those measurements say more about our own insecurities than the person we're judging. My family was no different. So I let them. I let them believe, because the truth wasn't ready to be revealed yet. And when it was, the silence that followed would be louder than any insult they had ever thrown. That evening, as the mist rolled back in and the reception wound down, I watched them laugh and chatter, certain of their superiority. They didn't know the ground beneath them was already cracking. Blake's bank was a house of cards. Rachel's career was about to vanish with a single email. My father's empire was slipping into foreclosure. They didn't know, but I did. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't about shouting your worth. It's about letting the world reveal the truth in its own time, until the lies people cling to collapse under their own weight. The service ended with polite applause for the string quartet, as if grief itself could be orchestrated into something elegant and consumable. People filed out in hushed tones, their black attire rustling like the wings of crows. I lingered near the side aisle, watching the massive floral arrangements wilt slightly under the heat of the lights. My mother would have rolled her eyes at the display: towering roses, lilies imported from Holland, orchids flown in overnight. To her, beauty had never been about extravagance. It had been about truth. My mother, Elise Morgan, had built her life on a principle both radical and simple. Clothes were never about labels, but about becoming who you were meant to be. For 30 years, she ran a modest boutique on Cypress Avenue. It wasn't just a shop, it was a sanctuary. Women walked in unsure of themselves, doubting their worth, and left transformed. Not because the dresses were expensive, but because she knew how to fit fabric to the soul. I grew up in that boutique. While other children played with toys, I played with scraps of fabric, learning how seams held, how silhouettes changed a person's posture, how color could summon courage. My mother taught me that a garment wasn't just cloth, it was a mirror, a shield, sometimes even wings. She used to say, "Fashion is never about impressing others. It's about recognizing yourself." Yet here I was, standing in a church filled with people who had never understood that lesson. My family least of all. At the reception afterward, I carried that memory of my mother like armor. Rachel had gathered her followers, whispering cruel comments disguised as observations. Blake checked his phone so obsessively it was clear he cared more about market numbers than about the woman we had just buried. My father, Gerald, shook hands with developers as if the funeral were a networking event. Eleanor was such a devoted mother, the pastor had said earlier, though he barely knew her. He spoke of family values, a phrase my mother detested. In truth, she hadn't been devoted to family in the way people expected. She was devoted to honesty, to craft, to showing women that self-worth could not be purchased, only understood. She would have hated the hollow speeches, the counterfeit tears. As I stood there, sipping my bitter coffee, I remembered nights in the boutique when she would close early, lock the front door, and sit with women who had just gone through divorces, or job losses, or illnesses. She'd pull a simple dress from the rack, adjust the hem with her pins, and whisper, "You are still beautiful. You are still yourself." She stitched dignity into fabric the way other people stitched words into letters. But none of that legacy was visible today. Instead, people spoke of her generosity at parties, her grace at charity galas. They reduced her to clichés because they'd never really seen her. It was in that moment, watching my father boast about deals, hearing Rachel laugh about appearances, noticing Blake's shallow distraction, that I realized I wasn't just mourning my mother. I was mourning the truth that had died with her, at least in their eyes. They didn't carry her lessons. They didn't even know what those lessons were. And yet, I did. That boutique on Cypress Avenue, with its faded gold lettering and squeaky wooden floors, wasn't just my inheritance. It was my foundation. It was where I built something the Morgans never understood. An empire not made of glass towers or risky loans, but of vision. The boutique was a mask, a quiet storefront that hid a vast underground network of design studios, archives, and boardrooms. To the world, I was Elise, the quiet daughter with a struggling shop. In reality, I was Elise Morgan, architect of a fashion empire that spanned continents. But on this day, surrounded by people blinded by their own illusions, I kept that truth to myself. I let them whisper about my dress, my car, my so-called failures. Because my mother's voice echoed in my memory. The strongest seams are invisible. The best work is done before the reveal. It's strange how society mirrors family in this way. People often mock what they don't understand, pity what they can't measure, dismiss what doesn't sparkle. My mother understood this. She once told me, "Elegance is not about being seen. It's about being known." At the time, I didn't fully grasp it. Now, standing in a hall filled with false sympathies, I did. I thought of how she would have hated today's spectacle. Rachel's designer dress costing more than rent, Blake's smug talk of stock markets, Dad's outdated Armani trying to hold its shape against the weight of debt. She would have preferred something smaller, intimate, just the boutique, a few candles, soft fabric draped across mannequins, stories shared in whispers, not speeches. But instead, her memory was being consumed by performance. That was when I decided, not out of rage, but out of clarity. If they refused to see her legacy, I would make sure the world did. And in showing the world, I would force my family to see me, not the failure they believed I was, but the heir to the wisdom they had ignored. I lifted my paper cup in a silent toast to my mother, to her quiet strength, to the boutique that had been mocked as a hobby, to the lessons stitched in silence, waiting for their moment to be revealed. The moment wasn't today. Not yet. But soon. The reception hall smelled of waxed wood and wilting lilies. Conversations hummed around me, like bees circling a hive made of borrowed pearls and overextended mortgages. I held my paper cup of church coffee as though it were fine porcelain, because in this family, the smallest details always became weapons. That was when Rachel's voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the polite murmur. There she is, she announced. Her quartet of admirers gathered like satellites around her. She waved me over, her manicured hand sparkling with the last piece of Cartier she hadn't pawned yet. Elise, we were just talking about you, she said, her smile brittle as glass. I was telling Vivian how brave you are, keeping Mom's little shop open. Though, honestly, she leaned closer, her stage whisper loud enough for half the hall to hear. Wouldn't it be easier to just work retail? Nordstrom has excellent benefits. Vivian, whose husband had filed for bankruptcy last month, nodded as if she understood struggle. There's no shame in a steady paycheck, she offered. My daughter started at Macy's, worked her way up to department manager. I took a slow sip of my bitter coffee. That's thoughtful advice, I said softly. Rachel wasn't finished. She tilted her head, inspecting me like I was an unfortunate stain. But really, Elise, I just can't believe you wore that to Mom's funeral. She gestured at my dress, her gel nails catching the light. I mean, I get it, times are tough for you, but couldn't you at least have tried? Mom deserved better than off the rack. The quartet tittered, loyal hyenas laughing at the cue of their queen. Blake appeared then, sliding into the circle with a predator's grin. Ever the opportunist when there was a chance to pile on. Hey, Ellie, he said, ignoring the fact that I'd asked him years ago to stop using that childhood nickname. If you need to borrow money for something appropriate next time, just ask. We're family. I smiled politely, though I noticed the stress lines around his eyes that even concealer couldn't mask. How generous, I murmured. Blake wasn't done. He warmed to his role, puffing up like a peacock. The offer stands for your shop too. I could help you get a small business loan. The rates would be brutal, given your situation, but hey, it might keep you afloat. My situation. The words dripped like poison, disguised as honey. If only he knew that while he begged federal regulators for leniency, I was orchestrating acquisitions that could buy and sell his bank 10 times over. Dad finally joined us, stepping into the circle like a king surveying his court. His cufflinks glinted, cheap replicas of the Cartier pair he'd sold months ago. Elise is doing fine with her hobby, he declared, his voice full of that fatherly dismissal I'd known all my life. Your mother left her that shop free and clear. Sometimes that's enough for some people. The sting wasn't new. Some people, as though I were a lesser species. As though ambition had only one acceptable form. Financial, visible, loud. Rachel chimed in, her tone syrupy with false generosity. She's not doing that badly. That vintage Prius is very eco-conscious. And living in a studio apartment, so easy to clean. I almost laughed. The Prius I drove only to family events, hiding my Bentley and chauffeur so as not to raise questions. The studio apartment that was actually the private floor of Meridian Towers, its windows stretching out across the Los Angeles skyline. But I let their assumptions wrap around me like an old, ill-fitting coat. Because assumptions are powerful, they reveal more about the speaker than the target. And my family's assumptions screamed desperation. Cousin Jennifer joined next, eager to prove her superiority. Elise, I have some clothes I was going to donate. Barely worn. Good brands too, Banana Republic, Ann Taylor. Would you like them for your shop? The pity in her tone burned hotter than mockery. I smiled again, the same smile I'd worn at every family gathering. "That's very thoughtful," I said. One by one, they took turns offering advice, charity, and condescension, like a performance piece rehearsed over decades. They talked about vacation homes they couldn't afford, while I owned 12 properties across 3 continents. They bragged about smart investments, while my portfolio could erase theirs with a single transaction. They offered me financial guidance, while my net worth could eclipse every person in that room combined. Yet what struck me wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. This was who they were, people who needed me small to feel large. People who dressed their envy as pity and called it kindness. Society isn't so different. We do it every day, measuring worth by handbags, cars, the square footage of a home, mocking what we don't understand, pitying what doesn't sparkle, and sometimes dismissing the very people who quietly build the foundations of tomorrow. My mother had taught me differently. Elegance, she used to say, isn't about being seen. It's about being known. Standing there, surrounded by laughter and pity, I realized how invisible I truly was to them, and how liberating that invisibility could be. Because invisibility makes room for transformation, for empire building, for revenge served not in rage, but in revelation. And as I looked around that circle of borrowed finery and false superiority, I knew the day was coming when their illusions would collapse. Not because I would shatter them, but because truth always does. The church bells had long gone silent when I slipped away from the reception. My family remained inside, clinking paper cups like royalty toasting in crystal, unaware of how fragile their illusions were. I walked alone through Newport's misty streets, the hem of my black crepe dress catching faint droplets of rain. To them, it was a cheap department store piece. To me, it was both a tribute and a declaration, a $30,000 original that whispered rather than screamed. By the next morning, I was back at Cypress Avenue, the boutique, my mother's sanctuary. To everyone else, it was a relic of simpler times, a quaint shop wedged between a dry cleaner and a vintage bookstore. The painted gold sign above the door had faded with years, yet it still glimmered with quiet dignity. Eleanor's. People thought it was all I had left, a daughter clinging to her mother's memory. But the truth, that boutique was an iceberg. On the surface, 400 square feet of curated racks, a single dressing room, an antique cash register that dinged with every sale. People saw dusty mannequins, whispered pity about low-foot traffic, wondered how I kept the lights on. They never looked deeper. They never imagined that beneath those wooden floorboards lay the foundation of a global empire. The boutique was camouflage. Past the stockroom where I'd once hidden during inventory days as a child, there was a false wall. My mother had installed it late at night, back when she still believed in teaching me secrets worth protecting. Pressing an old light switch, what looked like nothing more than a relic from the 70s, activated a biometric scanner. The wall opened inward on silent hinges. What lay beyond had no resemblance to the musty boutique. Clean lines, Italian marble stairs, lighting designed to make fabric sing. I descended, each step taking me further from the illusion my family clung to. The first level was a pattern-making studio. The dry cleaner next door? I'd bought it years ago, gutting its basement and filling it with machines that could bring sketches to life overnight. The bookshop on the other side? Its lower level now housed my archive, climate-controlled rooms containing every piece from every collection I'd ever designed. Dresses worn on red carpets, suits tailored for CEOs, gowns that had graced magazine covers under names no one connected to me. And 2 levels deeper, the truth roared. 40,000 square feet of workspace invisible to the street above. My design floor. Screens lined one wall, streaming real-time sales data from 63 Morgan Group stores across continents. Conversations drifted in a symphony of languages: French, Italian, Mandarin, English. Teams of artisans, designers, and marketers worked like constellations, each star burning bright, unseen by the world above. Here, there were no pitying glances, no mocking comments about my little shop. Here, I was not Elise, the family failure. I was Morgan, founder, architect, visionary. "Good morning, Miss Morgan," my team called as I entered. Not a trace of mockery. Only respect. Only recognition. At my command station, Elisa was already waiting with the morning reports. "Your predictions were accurate," she said without preamble. "Blake accessed his emergency accounts last night. Attempted to move funds offshore." I leaned closer, watching transaction flags flash across the screen. "Too late for that," I murmured. "The FBI will freeze everything by noon." "And your father?" "3 loan meetings scheduled today," she replied. "All distressed asset lenders. They'll reject him. I've already spoken with their risk teams." "And Rachel?" I pulled up a termination notice. It had gone out at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, clinical, professional, citing strategic realignment of brand ambassadors. She'd discover it when she woke, probably around noon, if her patterns held. Rachel believed herself untouchable, the new face of Valderie, strutting across campaigns as if the world owed her admiration. She had no idea that I had purchased Valderie through a shell company 3 weeks ago. By the time she finished her overpriced latte, she would be unemployed. A cruel sister would have smiled. I didn't. Instead, I felt the sharp ache of memory, Rachel at 7 years old, crying because classmates called her ugly. I had braided her hair into a crown that night, telling her she was beautiful. I had meant it. But beauty fades. Choices remain. On another screen, news tickers scrolled updates of Blake's bank, under investigation for predatory lending. His smugness yesterday, offering me a loan, echoed in my ears. He didn't know that his house of cards had already collapsed. Dad's empire of real estate. A mirage, propped up by refinancing and lies. By month's end, foreclosure notices would land on his desk like vultures circling a carcass. And yet, above the surface, my family still pitied me. Elise with her boutique, her Prius, her hobby. They never asked why my boutique lights stayed on until 3 a.m. They never wondered why clients who wore Louboutins slipped quietly through my doors. They never questioned how I survived with so little. Because they had to believe I was small. Their superiority depended on it. But smallness had been my shield. While they flaunted their borrowed luxury, I built substance in silence. While they mocked me at Christmas dinners, I stitched together an empire on principles my mother had taught me. Authenticity, persistence, vision. And now, as I stood in the nerve center of a global operation, watching data flow across screens, hearing languages interlace. I felt her presence. Eleanor Morgan, my mother. The woman who stitched dignity into seams and taught me that elegance was about knowing who you were. She had believed in me when no one else did. She had known this day would come. Soon, my family would know it too. The hum of machines in my underground atelier faded into the background as I stared at the screens. One showed Valderie's social media feed. Rachel, radiant in an ad campaign, still unaware she'd been erased from the brand by sunrise. Another showed Blake's bank, red alerts flashing as regulators dug deeper into the rot. And another showed Dad's real estate holdings, foreclosure notices queued up like dominoes ready to fall. For years, they had looked at me and seen fragility. Now the truth revealed itself. They were the fragile ones, living on credit, on lies, on illusions of grandeur that cracked under the lightest pressure. My phone buzzed. The family group chat. Dad had insisted on creating it after Mom's diagnosis, calling it grief support. It had rarely been about grief, mostly performance. Blake crushed it at the quarterly review. Mom would be proud. Rachel, on set for the Valderie shoot. Thinking of you, old Dad. Closed the Steinberg deal today. Persistence pays. All lies. I read them with a detached calm. Blake's review was an investigation. Rachel's shoot had been canceled days ago. And Dad's deal? I'd killed it myself once I realized he was using Mom's memorial fund as collateral. Sometimes the cruelest truth is also the simplest. They never stopped pretending. Not to each other. Not even to themselves. Elise appeared at my side, tablet in hand. Ms. Morgan, the reports are in. I nodded. Go ahead. Your brother's bank, liquidity crisis confirmed. His personal assets are leveraged at 340%. Your father, foreclosures proceeding on 3 properties, timeline 6 to 8 weeks before collapse. And Rachel, living on maxed credit cards. Lease ends next month. No funds for renewal. Her Valderie termination becomes official tomorrow. The words should have given me satisfaction. Instead, they felt heavy. Because behind every cruel sneer and dismissive laugh, I could still see pieces of childhood. Blake teaching me how to ride a bike before pushing me into a hedge and laughing. Rachel stealing my dresses but curling up beside me during thunderstorms. Dad, proud once when I won a local design contest at 16, before mocking me later for playing with fabric. They were flawed, selfish, blinded by pride, but they were mine. And now, they were falling apart. The intercom buzzed. Miss Morgan, you have visitors. I frowned. Who? 3 women. From yesterday's funeral. Rachel's quartet. Without their queen. Through the security feed, I saw them standing uncertainly at the boutique's front door. Vivian, Botox smooth but clearly nervous. Another clutching a designer bag like a shield. The third with sunglasses hiding regret more than sunlight. Let them in, I said. I met them upstairs, the boutique bathed in golden morning light. They shifted, unsure, stripped of yesterday's bravado. Is this a bad time? Vivian asked, her voice softer. Not at all, I said, gesturing toward the small seating area. Tea? They exchanged glances, then nodded. When we sat, it was Vivian who spoke first. We wanted to apologize. For yesterday. For Rachel. For ourselves. Rachel can be enthusiastic, I offered diplomatically. Cruel, Vivian corrected. And we went along with it. Your mother was always kind to us, and we disrespected her memory by treating you that way. For the first time in years, I felt something shift. These weren't enemies. They were people clinging to relevance, circling Rachel because she sparkled brighter than they did. Not bad people, just lost. I appreciate your honesty, I said. Tea? We sat for an hour, sipping oolong, sharing stories about my mother I'd never heard. Vivian revealed that my mother had dressed her for her wedding 30 years ago. She made me feel like Grace Kelly, Vivian whispered, touching a scarf from the boutique reverently. Not just beautiful, significant. That was my mother's gift, seeing people, really seeing them, elevating them, not with diamonds or labels, but with dignity. And it was the principle I'd built my empire on, scaled to a global stage. When the women left, they pressed cards into my hand, promising lunch when I was ready. For the first time in days, I felt the edge of grief soften into something gentler. Mom had touched lives beyond mine. Her legacy wasn't just in fabric, it was in the way she made people feel. By evening, I was back in my tower at Meridian, watching Los Angeles stretch into neon and shadow. My executive team waited with quarterly reports. Profits up 18%, Asian expansion ahead of schedule, 3 European acquisitions in play. But my thoughts drifted, again, to family. To the house of lies crumbling brick by brick. Elise, my VP of Brand Management, said carefully, about the Valderie situation. Do we proceed with termination? I pictured Rachel's sneer at the funeral, her voice dripping with superiority as she mocked my dress. But I also remembered her at 7, hair braided into a crown, begging me to tell her she was beautiful. Yes, I said quietly. Terminate. But include the transition package. She'll need it. My team nodded. They didn't know Rachel was my sister. To them, she was just another liability. That night, I stood on my private terrace, wine glass in hand. Below me, the city glittered with ambition and failure, secrets and revelations. Somewhere out there, my family was scrambling, still pretending they held control. They had no idea that the foundation beneath them had already eroded. I could have saved them. A single phone call, a wire transfer, a word to the right person. To me, their ruin was a rounding error, an inconvenience I could erase in minutes. But mercy, I realized, isn't always kindness. Sometimes mercy is letting people face the consequences of who they chose to be. The phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it until I recognized the prefix. The federal building downtown. Ms. Morgan? A man's voice, steady and professional. This is Agent Davies with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We understand you may have information relevant to our investigation into Western Pacific Bank. Blake's Bank. I steadied my voice. I might. What exactly are you investigating? He outlined their case: fraud, predatory lending, money laundering. Words that sliced through the Los Angeles night like glass. My brother wasn't just reckless. He was complicit. By the time the call ended, I realized the truth. What I'd seen as orchestrated revenge might, in the end, be mercy compared to what awaited Blake in court. I set down my glass, the 1982 Chateau d'Yquem glowing amber in the moonlight. Mom, I whispered into the quiet, you taught me that elegance is about knowing who you are. Tonight, I know exactly who I am. The city woke under a haze of marine layer, the kind of soft Los Angeles morning where sunlight takes its time arriving. I had been awake for hours already, scanning overnight reports, approving a capsule collection for Milan Fashion Week, and pretending not to see the string of frantic messages from my family. Blake, they froze everything. Can't even buy gas. Do you know someone who can fix this? Rachel, lost my apartment. 48 hours to move. Please, Elise, please call me. Dad, emergency family meeting tonight. Your childhood home needs you. The same home he'd mortgaged 3 times over, leveraged until even the walls carried debt. By 8 o'clock, I was back at the boutique on Cypress Avenue. To outsiders, it was the same modest storefront it had been for decades. To me, it was both sanctuary and stage. My assistant Elisa had already transformed the back office into a war room. Leather portfolio on the desk, contracts prepared, timelines mapped to the hour. The investor your father is counting on? She reported briskly. We intercepted yesterday. He won't show. And the press? The Wall Street Journal publishes at 4 Eastern. Profile is locked, airtight. They've confirmed E. Morgan is a woman, but still no family connection. I smiled faintly. Good. Let them stew a little longer. At 11, the boutique door chimed. Not customer. Vivian again, the friend from Rachel's circle, shoulders tight with something between shame and courage. Elise, she said, her polish cracked. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I have a confession. I poured tea, gestured for her to sit. Go on. My niece at Parsons showed me a photo years ago, Milan trade show. You were in the background. I recognized you. I've known for years who you are, but I never told anyone. I just wanted you to know that someone sees you, really sees you. And your mother would be so proud. For a moment, my carefully maintained walls shook. Not because of exposure, but because of the simple truth in her voice. Someone had seen me. Not Elise the failure. Not E. Morgan the phantom. Just me. After she left, pressing my hand with unexpected warmth, I sat with the quiet and thought of Mom's last notebook. Her looping handwriting. E understands fashion isn't about clothes. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. The afternoon unfolded like dominoes. Dad's investor no-showed, leaving him stranded at a restaurant table, pride forcing him to sit long after hope had fled. Blake's public defender urged him to consider a plea deal. Rachel, stripped of filters and finery, hauled suitcases to a storage unit, her Instagram suddenly silent. At 3:47, the call came. Dad's voice, raw, almost unrecognizable. Elise, I need you at the house. Now. I told him 7. Business first. Mercy, if it came, would come on my terms. That evening, I drove the Prius to Bear, parking between Rachel's booted Porsche and Blake's impounded Mercedes. The tableau of dysfunction lined the driveway like monuments to arrogance. Inside, the house echoed with emptiness where artwork had been sold, furniture repossessed. My family stood clustered in the living room, as though proximity could restore authority. Sit, Dad commanded, still clinging to his faded role. I chose a chair apart, deliberately separate. Which situation are we discussing tonight? The FBI investigation? The foreclosure? Rachel's eviction? Their faces froze. I pressed on, voice calm, almost gentle. You see, I read the news. And people talk? Los Angeles is a small city when reputations begin to crumble. Rachel cracked first, her voice pitched high. We need to sell the boutique. Quick cash. It won't solve everything, but it's a start. No. The word fell like stone. Elise, be reasonable, Dad snapped. It's just a building. Mom's gone. Keeping it won't bring her back. The boutique stays, I said firmly. Blake slammed his laptop shut. 3 against 1. We inherited equally. You don't get to decide alone. Actually, I said, sliding Elisa's leather portfolio across the coffee table. I do. Their eyes scanned the notarized documents. Mom's signature. Power of attorney. Transfer of the boutique. And more. Dad's hands shook. This gives you control of the entire estate. Yes. She trusted me. Because she knew what you'd do the moment she was gone. Sell her legacy for scraps. Rachel's voice broke. This is fake. It has to be. Authenticated if you like. Though you'll need a new law firm. Yours is under federal investigation. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. For once, they were speechless. Then I dropped the real revelation. Do you remember the Wall Street Journal profile that went live this afternoon? The one about E. Morgan, the mystery designer who built a $9 billion empire? That's me. The pause that followed was almost holy. You're lying, Blake muttered. You live in a studio. You drive a Prius. I own 14 properties worldwide. The Prius was camouflage. The studio? The penthouse at Meridian Towers? Dad's fury finally broke. If this is true, then you've been lying to us for years. Watching us struggle while you hoarded billions. Struggle? I asked softly. When you mocked me at Christmas dinner? When you suggested Nordstrom benefits? When you tried to sell Mom's boutique tonight? No, you weren't struggling. You were dismissing me. Nia. Because it was easier than seeing me. They flinched as if struck. My phone buzzed. I answered on speaker. Elisa's crisp voice. Ms. Morgan, Tokyo is on the line for the expansion call. The Valdery board is requesting an emergency session. And the Times just asked for comment. Tell Tokyo I'll join in 15, I said smoothly. Tell the Times, no comment. And prepare the Valdery meeting for tomorrow. When I hung up, their eyes were wide, disbelief giving way to something worse. Realization. This is real, Blake whispered. Every word, I said. I stood, checking my watch. Now, here are my terms. Dad, I'll buy this house through a trust. You can rent below market, but the empire you built on illusions is gone. Blake, I'll provide a lawyer. If you tell the truth, you may see probation. If not, you'll see prison bars. Rachel, there's an entry-level job waiting at one of my subsidiaries. Marketing assistant. Minimum wage. You'll earn your way up. That's humiliating, Rachel sobbed. No, I corrected. That's opportunity. More than you ever gave me. Their faces crumpled, grief and rage twisting together. For the first time, I didn't feel small before them. I felt free. As I walked toward the door, Rachel's voice trembled behind me. Elise, at Mom's funeral. That dress. You made it, didn't you? I turned, meeting her tear-blurred eyes. Yes. And while you mocked it, the whole world will be wearing it next season. I left them there, drowning in the ruins of their illusions. Outside, the air smelled of jasmine and exhaust, the perfume of Los Angeles nights. Driving away, I thought of Mom, her hands guiding fabric, her voice whispering truths about elegance, patience, vision. She had seen me. She had known. And now the world knew too. Because the best revenge isn't cold. It isn't loud. It isn't even couture. It's truth. Revealed at the moment when silence no longer serves. And in that truth, finally, I was free.